Alright, so if you're here to see my predictions for the end of Wano, you were baited. Nah, I'm joking. I don't know why I said that, but I wanted to feel a little bit like Oda saying that Luffy wouldn't beat Kaido with a punch, but then we're left on chapter 1049 with essentially Oda trolling us, right? That being said, I will be talking about a lot of different things that I'm either predicting or want to see, not just with the end of the fight, but also with Wano in general. If you haven't watched my chapter 1049 first read reaction video yet, I would definitely go watch that first. This will contain current manga spoilers, so if you're not caught up, get caught up. And if you're new to my channel, the way I view the world is by making connections. So let me connect you to my vision, the ParVision. Alright, so let's tackle the most near future question of whether this fight with Kaido is over. As I laid out in my first read reaction, there is an argument to be made on either side of the question. And to further establish that uncertainty, the polls I saw asking whether Kaido will get back up cumulatively added to a near 50-50 split right after the chapter dropped. And over time now, seemingly swayed towards the fight not being over and Kaido will be getting back up. But alright, to really lay out all of the predictions that I want to talk about in this video, the first thing, I think Kaido will be getting back up and the fight will continue. And number two, I think we will be getting a more fleshed out Kaido backstory flashback. And number three, I think Orochi and others will return to the fight. Number four, I don't think Onigashima is going to be staying where it is outside of the Flower Capital, and that kind of ties to my idea around Toki being alive still, based on what was said in chapter 1048. And number five, the end of this war will be messy, but there will be a huge transition once the sun rises. And number six, I think Kaido does die by the end of Wano. So we will be talking about a lot of things, and in between each point there might be other predictions that I don't necessarily establish above, but yeah. So I think Kaido will get back up, and expectedly half of you are probably already up in arms already. It also seems like this question is implicated by Morge's raid failing movement, which I went to his stream to hear it from the man himself, and he also separated out the points. Kaido can still get back up and the raid could still be a success. Just because Kaido gets back up doesn't guarantee a win or loss either way. But to clarify, I think the raid will be a success, and I think Kaido still gets back up and it's successful after that. I mean, okay, let's back it up a little. I don't even think Orochi is down yet. In 1049, we were shown the head of Orochi again for some reason after he was defeated. And throughout Wano, when someone was defeated, when were we ever shown them again? From the Tobiropo to Big Mom, once they were defeated, we didn't really get any updates unless they were going to do something. And so if you weren't there at my 1048 reaction, then just to explain my understanding of Orochi's situation, it's that, well, I'm going to be deep diving mythical zoans in a video soon, but given that he is also a mythical zoan, it feels almost like a waste that his fruit wasn't ever really utilized properly. And that's largely Orochi's fault because he's, Orochi. But Orochi has a setup right now to awaken. From what we understand of awakenings, it's when the mind and body start to sync up with the powers of the fruit. And it apparently appears in a close to death scenario. That could be exclusive to Luffy, or if you watch my Guardian Spirit video, then there might be other contingencies for awakening a mythical zoan. That being said, you're like Orochi syncing his powers with this fruit? Like, what, Orochi? No way. And I'm like, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think Orochi is worth anything. I don't think he should be awakening like Luffy. So I think instead we will see the disparity for awakenings for Zoans. We are witnessing a freshly awakened sun god Nika, where Luffy seems to be in tune with his powers, but he still doesn't really know the full context of it. Then there is Kaido, who, given the amount of time and power he has with his fruit, and he was the one who talked about awakenings, it makes sense that he awakens also, and I'll explain more about that point in a second. But so Kaido would show us an awakening if someone who has a full mastery of their devil fruit. And I'm saying that knowing that if Kaido awakens, it would detract from my Guardian Spirit theory in a way. But for right now, let's talk about Orochi. So I think Orochi will awaken, but he'll show us the example of what happens when the fruit takes over the body, and it will resemble the impaled down beast jailer situation. This is the perfect arc to debut the mindless awakened Zoans, and Orochi's a great candidate for it. I mean, not much. I wouldn't care if Orochi just like lost it and we never saw Orochi again. That would fulfill the line on the balloon where it's like, can Orochi just disappear? Because this would be a great way to have that happen. I think it would make less sense to give Orochi a mythical zoan if it were only to have him die uneventfully 8 times in a row. Like, that's kind of what just happened. And with the line that zoans have a will of their own, we might see that will overpower the annoying Orochi, right? Orochi's easy to overpower when it comes down to it. That being said, with Onigashima where it is and the lead up to it, there's so many more thoughts that come to mind. One of the first things that comes to mind is Oda's introduction of the narrator cards declaring the outcome of the fights. We were given them for Queen, King, Big Mom, and even Luffy. But that's the problem, right? We got the narrator card for Luffy in chapter 1043, but obviously that declaration was overturned by the recent developments. Unless we were doing rounds or something, in which case Luffy already lost the previous 4 rounds. With this in mind, I think we have to reconsider that at least some, if not all of the previous narrator cards can be overturned, just like it was for Kaido versus Luffy. And when you think about it, we were never shown the bodies of any of the defeated people after they lost, but we were kind of shown where they ended up. All of them were booted off of Onigashima and may be in a similar state to Big Mom, conscious and simply waiting for a moment to return to the fight. So that being said, I think the fight cards might be overturned, but we might not get the same matchups. So before we get to Kaido specifically, and I list out all the reasons why I think he's coming back, these are the possible fights we see, and keep in mind, most of the people here are Zoans, and they're known for their abilities to recover anyways. So I think we might see Sanji versus King. Their relations seem to be hinted at on multiple occasions, and their fight was even added randomly into the anime. And I think it makes sense because Sanji's genetic background is still a mystery, and so is the history of Lunarians. Even in the fight Sanji had with King, Sanji asked about the history, and Queen told him to go ask a history book. So I think a clash between Sanji and King makes sense because both of them might learn something about themselves through each other. It might be possible that the experimentations done on King in the past was a crucial element to the creation of the Vinsmoke siblings. And it seemed odd that we're made to believe that King is the last Lunarian, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of available information about them, but we didn't learn about the Lunarians beforehand, like throughout the fight with King and Zoro. But King was taken out of the picture after Zoro beat him. That kind of tells me either we learn about Lunarians through poneglyphs, which would be the history book Queen tells Sanji to look at, or we learn from King himself. So that being said, I mentioned an awakened Orochi. Who would fight that? Given it would be a mythical zone awakening, it's probably pretty strong. And one of our main characters said that they wanted to take down Orochi themselves, and I think it would be Zoro who takes down the awakened Orochi. Now, I do want to clarify that I'm not 100% certain on these predictions, but the above two would make sense based on some things that were set up previously. The other remaining players like Queen and Big Mom might return to the fight in a different capacity than the one-on-one battle type of situation. For example, in the anime, the opening shows Onigashima's skull animated, alive, and moving, and it could be the skull gets a homie infusion from Big Mom, and also, moving forward, there may not be pure 1v1s or isolated battles. Maybe it becomes another brawl in a similar way to how the war on Onigashima even started. Which brings me to a major point about Kaido, the man who technically started it all. I strongly believe that the end of 1049 will lead to a temporary pause in Kaido's presence, but what will be interesting now that Kaido is where he is the concept of voices. Whenever Luffy lost or was defeated, from various people throughout Onigashima, the emphasis of realizing the state of the fight was reliant on the voice, whether they could hear Luffy or not. So when Luffy's voice disappeared, people thought he was defeated or died. It will be interesting now to see how the people who are sensing the voices receive Kaido's current state. Will Kaido's voice disappear momentarily? And so talking about the flashback in 1049, the way I received the flashback was that it was kind of like Kaido's life was flashing before his eyes, before he took the punch. That's why it was so quick and expansive, and it felt like this flashback kind of gave us the context to now get a more in-depth flashback about Kaido. And not just Kaido, but King, and possibly Queen also, though the primary focus of the flashback will be Kaido's, I'm pretty sure. For so many reasons, it makes sense that Kaido gets at least 2 to 3 chapters of flashback, as Big Mom got 3 chapters of flashback herself. And I think Kaido has a lot more setup than Big Mom has gotten in the entirety of the Yonko saga, right? And there's the important note to be made in chapter 1049. There was a perfect gap in time in Kaido's flashback, which I think if we get a future flashback, this will be the focal point of the time period and be the time where everything is explained. The gap period I'm talking about is the time after God Valley and before Kaido met Higurashi. All the other time periods had less of a time jump. All the other time periods had less of a time jump than this one, where, as stated by Higurashi, it would be 10 years after God Valley, where Higurashi proposes the Wano takeover plan. The reason why this timeline is important is because Oda can leave out the God Valley part while still teasing Rocks and God Valley event itself, but teasing it by showing how Kaido was affected by it. We get a rough understanding of Kaido beforehand, but not after. In this 10-year gap, Kaido gets his mythical dragon fruit, he starts his own pirate crew, presumably the Beast Pirates. We don't know if he had an ongoing relationship with Higurashi, but it would seem so since she had the other Rocks pirates' faces saved with her powers, like Shiki. Kaido meets King and Queen during this time and they join his crew, and 2 years before Higurashi proposes her plan, Yamato is born. So according to my calculation, the year that Higurashi proposes his plan is the same year she helps Orochi become shogun, and that year is 1496, which, if you didn't know, is something I was working on in the Voice of All Things live stream that happened every Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. But anyways, that would make it so Yamato was born in 1494, which is the same year, by the way, that Momo was born on Whitebeard's ship. So there's a lot of information that is extremely valuable during that 10 years where Kaido becomes known as the embodiment of might as well, on top of everything else. I think when we get the next flashback, that's where we will be. We'll probably also learn of how Kaido ended up being the spiraling, depressed drunk that he is today, whereas in the flashback now, besides Vodka Kingdom, there was no indication of any alcohol. Something that I thought of while I was talking about this was that during that 10 years, it almost seems like Kaido went through some kind of Luffy post-Marineford situation, where Luffy lost all sanity and grip on life. Like, if you read the lines that Jinbei says to Luffy and think about it in the context of Kaido after God Valley, replacing Ace with Rocks, maybe Kaido is the Luffy that didn't have a Jinbei to ground him. Jinbei says to Luffy, "Where's your confidence that you can overcome anything? What happened to that strength that you never doubted? You've now met countless ruthless enemies who can easily crush you in what you believe in. You even lost your brother who was your guide on these seas. A giant wall stands between your eyes and the world. You can't see the way forward right now. Regret and guilt are consuming you." Maybe Kaido was consumed by the regret and guilt, and maybe the wall that stood in between Kaido and his dreams was why Kaido was driven to become the strongest creature in the world. It will be interesting to see what kind of life Kaido lived after God Valley. That being said, I think after we get this flashback of that 10 years, which I think will happen, Kaido will re-emerge from the depths of Wano. It might even be done in a way where if his voice was missing before, he might let out his war cry and bring terror into everyone within the vicinity. Kaido's scream might even be heard throughout Wano. And I asked Morge a similar question, and Morge responded saying that there's a possibility that Kaido lets out his war cry, his victory cry, and that awakens all the Zoans in his crew. I'm not sure with that happening, because that would be insane and really exciting, But I do think after the Kaido flashback, we would get the awakening from Kaido. That being said, Luffy is currently wiped out, it seems. It might be that now Luffy needs that break that he typically gets after debuting his new form. In Dressrosa, after showing off Gear 4, he knocked Doflamingo out to the point people had believed Luffy won the fight already. But Luffy knew it wasn't over because of Birdcage, which brings us to a really interesting parallel that I think helps us know that Kaido is not defeated. See, similar to Birdcage, Kaido also had an ability that was tethered to his consciousness, the flame clouds holding up Onigashima. I want to shout out AI for pointing this out in the comments in my 1049 video, but when you think about it, the whole understanding of Onigashima was that if it remained in the sky, that meant Kaido was still alive. If it fell and everyone died, then they knew Kaido was defeated. And interestingly, Oda showed us the sequence of events where Kaido was defeated, but the island did not plummet, resulting in everyone's death. The big interesting point here is that Oda cleverly removed that Kaido consciousness indicator of the flame clouds right before Kaido was defeated. In a normal situation, if we wanted to know if Kaido was defeated, we would simply look at the flame clouds to know. But we can't do that because Raizo unleashed Zunisha's bathwater to put out the flames of Kazimbo, which resulted in the water leaking out of the island and washing away the flame clouds. Because of this, we are now even more unsure whether Kaido is completely defeated or not. And again, the concept that Kaido being defeated would result in the disappearance of these flame clouds has been reiterated several times over the last 20 plus chapters. So removing the flame clouds just before Kaido is supposedly defeated is a genius play on Oda's part to increase the uncertainty in this moment of whether Kaido will continue to be a threat or not. And it almost makes more sense to do this to hide the fact that Kaido is not defeated rather than the other way around. So with this in mind, there's still other reasons why I believe Kaido is still alive. The main thing being that this is the first time Kaido would have been down by anything, really. And if Luffy the Challenger has gotten up 4 times and even through death, then I think it makes sense that the strongest creature in the world and the strongest creature to date, the strongest character to date, will be able to get back up through death also. The being close to death part may even be the reason why Kaido is able to awaken, as it might not have been something he'd ever experienced in the past. Kaido seeking to be pushed towards death might be why his character has been searching for death this whole time. Maybe somehow he knew that awakenings come when you are close to death, and for someone as durable as Kaido, it was something that he couldn't reach normally. That might be why he was even more upset about the whole Oden situation, because Oden might have been that person who drove him to the awakening state. And so another reason why I don't think Kaido is down is because with the last lines from him in 1049, where he starts recognizing that Luffy might be the man stronger than him, Joy Boy, I think Kaido will want to essentially go plus ultra in testing Luffy. It might be that since he has finally started to sense that Luffy is Joy Boy, he might have an increased will as a result of being in the presence of the man or boy that throughout all of his backstories that we've received talked about Joy Boy in an interesting light, almost a light of admiration or envy, which I'll get back to in a minute. This is a perfect time to mention beginnings, so to say. The start of Wano's story truthfully begins with Oden, but the person who put all the pieces in the right places was actually Toki. She sent Momo and some of the scabbards to the future, but also her dying words were what carried the samurai's will to survive over the last 20 years. That being said, I think these lines still have not been fulfilled. She says, "You are the moon, unaware of the dawn. May your purpose be fulfilled and cast 9 shadows on the night woven of 20 years, and you shall know the brilliance of the dawn." The biggest question that I think that should be answered is, who is Toki talking to? Who is the you? I think it makes the most sense right now if she were speaking to Kaido. So if you were to kind of dissect this a little bit, I think what might be understood here is that the moon kind of plays a similar role to the sun, in that it illuminates our world. During the night, the moon is the only presence there. But that is because during the night, it's not in the presence of the sun. When the dawn comes, the sun shows its brilliance and its power, and the moon realizes that there's something better at fulfilling its purpose. So if we say that Luffy is the sun or dawn, and Kaido is still unaware of Luffy, but is now slowly recognizing that Luffy is Joy Boy or Nika, or a combination of both, I think that once Kaido's purpose is fulfilled, he will recognize Luffy as the true Joy Boy, which we haven't gotten yet. We also still don't know who the 9 shadows are. If it were the Akazaya 9, it would be a little weird since Kanjuro was a traitor, and these 9 shadows might be shown when the dawn rises. And if Luffy is the dawn, then maybe it's his crew that would be the 9 shadows. And we still have yet to learn of what Momo's larger importance is, and why it was understood from Odin's journal that he could not die, and was supposed to help bring the dawn of the world. But so then, what is Kaido's purpose? Well, if we think about it like this, he is the moon, and then the moon is simply the presence when the sun is missing. The moon provides a light provided by the sun. But once the sun is in the sky itself, the moon kind of fades away. So Kaido is going to fade away, I guess? Well, when you think about it, when we were introduced to Kaido in chapter 794, we were told before even his name that his hobby was to unalive himself. And even more than that, he says Whitebeard did it right. In Onigashima, he says Roger and Whitebeard both did it right. It being dying, and what did they die for? Well, we'll look at that in a second, which, just adding here, is interesting because he never mentioned Rox, who's presumably died at God Valley, but it's just like he only mentioned Roger and Whitebeard. So I wonder what that means. But anyways, Kaido later says death is what completes a person. It seems like Kaido's story is completed with death. And so in a lot of ways, it seems like Kaido's purpose was to be the placeholder until the sun arrives. Which now brings me to the next point of this, where yes, I think Kaido will get back up. He will awaken, and there will be more fighting. But I do think Kaido will die still, and it will come after he fights Luffy enough to realize that he is Joy Boy. So once Kaido realizes the brilliance of the dawn, his purpose will be fulfilled. So once Kaido realizes Luffy is Joy Boy, that is when we might see a switch in his purpose. See, an interesting line I want to reference here in relation to King, which ties Kaido's relative desire to be Joy Boy, it comes when King says in chapter 1036, when Kaido asks if King thinks he is Joy Boy, and King responds, "Legends are legends, that is all. No, I seek nothing from you anymore. My life belongs to you. Just continue to be the strongest there is." Then we find out in 1049 that Kaido had said to King before that Joy Boy will be the man who is stronger than Kaido. It almost seems like King would give his life to a person who is the strongest, and Kaido on his own seems to be searching for Joy Boy or fulfilling what he thinks of Joy Boy himself. So I'm saying this because in the back of my mind, since as early as chapter 1010, it felt like Kaido and Luffy's fight was similar to Katakuri's fight with Luffy, where by the end of it, Katakuri acknowledges Luffy and allows Luffy to continue without putting up more resistance. I think we might get the very same thing here with Kaido and Luffy. Now, something I want to emphasize here is that I don't think Kaido will be an ally of Luffy or join the Grand Fleet. Even I think that would be a huge stretch and kind of unacceptable. But maybe the conversation is better understood this way. Let's say Kaido is defeated with this punch on 1049. Is he killed by this punch? No, I don't think so. Basically, the way I see it is that coming out of Wano, Kaido has to die. Now, that is a little misleading, but hear me out. So again, let's think about it like this. If Kaido is defeated on Wano without death, what happens afterwards? Kaido cannot remain alive because unlike Doflamingo or any other antagonist, who would detain Kaido? Kaido would remain imprisoned by who and what entity? I don't think there's really anybody that I can think of that can detain Kaido for a long period of time, or at all. Considering the world government probably tried their hardest to do so on younger Kaido and still failed, I can't see a world where Kaido is ever restrained, which is important. If he remains an antagonist to Luffy for the rest of the story, then we're saying that the strongest creature alive that is still an opponent to Luffy could just show up at any time to challenge or threaten Luffy. Leaving Kaido alive in this sense would be really confusing. So then the way to avoid that would be to make Kaido Luffy's ally. And I say ally loosely. I don't think Kaido can actually be an active supporter of Luffy. And when you think about it, right? If Kaido is the moon and Luffy is the sun, then what happens if both try to be in the same place at the same time? We get a solar eclipse or a lunar eclipse. So in that regard, it makes more sense for the moon to just stay out of the sun's way. In that regard, also, moving forward, Kaido could just do nothing, and that would be supporting Luffy, which even that is a little weird, for Kaido to be present but absent given how impactful he would be. So then that takes me to the example of one of Luffy's antagonists that actually became his ally, but had to die first. Clearly, I'm not talking about Katakuri, but I love bringing this character up because the story of it was so meaningful. The person I'm talking about is Bellamy. See, Bellamy was a pirate who over time gained respect for Luffy, but because Bellamy lived his whole life devoted to a certain morality and chasing Doflamingo's ideals, he became a villain that could not simply turn a new leaf. In order to complete his life and change, he needed to be killed. And he wanted to be killed by Luffy, the man who showed him the light. Now we know that Bellamy didn't actually die, so why am I saying that he was killed? Well, Bellamy was a pirate, and it was his dream to be a pirate on Doflamingo's side, and Luffy destroyed that dream, and destroyed the person that he looked up to. So after the fight with Luffy on Dressrosa, Bellamy quit being a pirate, and is now a dyer, which is an interesting name for the profession, but it essentially means he makes pirate flags now. He's not a pirate, he quit. So you can kind of see how Bellamy as a pirate died, and now he holds Luffy's Vivre card and is not necessarily a part of the alliance, but is a friend to them. So with that in mind, is there a similar parallel possible for Kaido? No, I don't think so. I don't think there's a world where Luffy calls him a friend, and I don't think anyone can really forgive him for the atrocity he's done to Wano. It's not like Bellamy was out here enslaving an entire country for years on end. And on top of that, if we're saying a pseudo-death could be Kaido giving up on his dreams and leaving pirating, well, that could be possible, but I don't think Kaido would let go of his dreams, which then leads me to the final point with Kaido. We know that at this point, whatever comes out of Luffy will be the final last leg of his abilities. That being said, there's still an uncountable number of moving parts en route to Wano. We have Zunisha, possibly the Big Mom pirate still, the world government, and we don't know who is on those ships. But on top of that, in 1049, we see the CP0 agent escaping Onigashima, which, if that plotline continues, anytime we see interactions with the Gorosei, now it leads to some game-changing actions. Like the last time they interacted with us, we got Gear 5 Sun God Nika Luffy. Like, that's insane. So maybe we see an admiral presence in Onigashima now due to the actions of the CP0 agent. And we are unsure of what parts remain that would be on Luffy's side. We are unaware if the Grand Fleet is en route due to Luffy's burnt Vivre card, which it should be burnt by this point. Or maybe the Revolutionary Army is on their way and it will just get surprised by it. And then there's also the Blackbeard and Shanks. They're always the wild card, it seems. And so, depending on the fallout of the other moving parts, what we might see is Kaido commanding his pirates to defend Luffy after recognizing the brilliance of the Dawn. And due to the growing fatigue that Kaido has now accumulated, and the possibility of an extremely strong world government's presence, possibly an admiral or maybe the SSG, that could surprise us too, then we might see that Kaido ultimately sacrifices himself for Luffy or Joy Boy's sake. And I have a feeling that it might even parallel Whitebeard's death. In Whitebeard's final chapters, he continually gave his support to Luffy to save him and keep him alive. We might see a similar display here. And now the biggest thing I think that will happen if Kaido dies is that he won't die without a declaration of his own. All of the greats so far has had their final speech. Roger started the golden age of pirates with his last words and declared the existence of the greatest treasure that all the pirates are seeking, called the One Piece, which was instigated to fulfill the 20-year prophecy of Joy Boy's return. When Whitebeard died, he told the world government that there will be someone who turns the world upside down, and again reiterated that the One Piece exists. Odin died declaring that his will would live on, which ended up happening through Yamato, but also commanding that Wano's borders be open for Joy Boy's return. And that brings us to Kaido, the man who said the person who is stronger than him is Joy Boy. So I think that towards the end of Kaido's life, whether it's a real death or not, he will declare to the world that Luffy is Joy Boy, and that he will be the man to change the world, thus furthering the declarations of the greats. Roger sets up the era, Whitebeard revives it and facilitates it, and Kaido would be the man who determines Joy Boy's identity. Kaido might even say that Luffy is the dawn of the world, or something along those lines. Now again, this idea is not fully fleshed out in that I'm not sure what the circumstances would be as to where Kaido will die or who will be involved in his death, but I think for Kaido's character and macro role in the story, I think he would need to have a death to complete his arc. And that being said, I think that it makes sense that Kaido would die to the world government. Like, he would die to the world government by protecting Luffy. He would give up his life for that reason, and that was that happened with Roger, that happened with Whitebeard, and now it would happen with Kaido too, which would, you know, connect him with all the other greats. So I think I covered most of the predictions that I stated at the start, though again, it's not for all of Wano. I also didn't talk about the Toki thing, so I will bring that up in another predictions video. But yeah, the main takeaway I think is that Kaido might have to die by the end of Wano, and I don't think Kaido is dead after 1049, which leads me to believe that there will be more to come. And adding on top of that, I think the story is more difficult to manage if Kaido is defeated here, but also not dead. And since I'm ending this video, I do want to add that I have this weird feeling that Sun God Nika and Joy Boy might have had a relationship with the dragon within Kaido's fruit, or maybe beyond that, maybe Nika was the guardian deity of the mythical zoans, like the guardian spirit mythical zoans. And so if you like this video and the style, this new style, let me know. I might incorporate this more as it makes it easier to get videos out. And I do want to practice getting comfortable with, you know, being on camera. And I have a lot of videos in queue, and I will be varying the formats in the future. Anyways, let me know what you think about this prediction. Wano still has so much left to talk about, so I will definitely be talking more about it. And also, if you want to support me, please remember to like, share, and subscribe, and spread the vision, the ParVision. Also, if you enjoy One Piece conversations, come through to the weekly live streams that I have called The Voice of All Things, currently on Saturdays at 8 p.m. Eastern. And so, like always, thank you for connecting with me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on the next ParVision.